Well, thanks, Simeon. I hope I'm audible enough. I'm just using the laptop audio today. So hi, everyone. It's good to be back again, at this convening. PS17 started this journey on PS7, so almost 10 PF for participation here. And yeah, it has been a great journey since from the beginning, and how we actually structured our work stream, which is one of the core supporting work stream. We get deep participation of existing members, guys that are sitting on reference architecture, the core team and whoever is playing there, because we're just running this as an integrated program and not as anything that is standalone, just to make sure that all what we're doing is coherent, across the modular loop. So in terms of how we started and how we defined ourselves from the beginning, it stays the same, nothing has changed. Just for those who are new to modular loop, just to try and understand, why are we doing what we're doing and what is the bigger picture story for our work stream. So essentially is kind of like our utmost attempt to resolve, the evolving problem of cyber threat, and also to try and look into the regulatory landscape as much as we can. But that's actually something that we really leave it to the implementation team to ascertain and identify, and they can bring that as feedback into us for us to consider it into the product. But overall, we watch the regulatory landscape market, and we identify issues that we could think that they are common in the payment switching industry, and we bring them in as features into this product. Objective stays the same, to get the trust of modular loop, in line with L1P principles. And our model of delivery also stays the same, as kind of like approaching this both from a functional and non-functional requirements, but working deeply with other work streams and governance committees in a shared responsibility model. And we widen this up to implementers, and we have very good engagement with one or two implementers that are keeping us abreast with their development, and the community at large. So the delivery model is everybody in the community will play a part, and we have a space for that to listen to all various voices. Our approach has always been, from the beginning, it has been, control centric, and lately in PS7, we bring on in the standard part of it just to try and baseline all what you do to the standards that are out there. And also we brought in risk and threat centric side of it, just to, making sure that we identify key, risks and key threats that we need to prioritize. So this actually helped us, especially as an open source foundation with limited resources. It really guides us to only tackle things that are really, really important for the platform. The milestones, we've achieved a lot from building the foundational confidentiality and integrity into the algorithm from the beginning. And we have evolved that through, a series of, phases until phase 5. Where now we are actually kind of like trimming down what we do, looking at the residual risk and critical gaps, and working together to close those. So that's typically where we are in phase 5, and continuously, working on embedding security into, the reference architecture, which for us will be kind of like the new model of how, things will be added onto the platform. But we're not neglecting V1. We're actually looking at what can be enhanced on V1, especially from a kind of like a emergency perspective. If anything comes from the implementation team, we'll never, let them down. We will actually make sure that we can source. When this is done, universally is providing this as a platform that is trusted, security built into it to give confidence to the adopters, that the risk of data breaches and the risk of payment, exposures is actually being controlled. And as a foundation, we just want to make sure that we control any potential this PI, we put kind of like, a priority, objectives that we achieve, about 5 of them. Sorry for the mistype of the numbers. And I'll actually be going through this one by one, and giving a little bit of feedback of what we had planned to do in each and what we've achieved, and what is the roadmap for each going forward. So we sized this to, the importance of what we're currently doing at the moment, like the additions of the RFMS system, and also we continue to manage what we have. So around DevSecOps, we've got kind of like a factory to look after. So we actually don't kind of like short cycle anything. So we look at what we need to do as ongoing maintenance, and also what we need to do to enhance. And lastly, not actually neglecting our implementers. We actually keep touch with them. We support where is needed. And very importantly, we learn from their implementation experiences, because from the Moja Loop side, we're building this and somebody else is actually implementing it. So the two teams kind of like has to work together to really find the real things when rubber hits the road. So yeah, that was in a nutshell what we plans to do. Starting with the reference architecture security domain. We worked very closely with Pedro as the lead in here, and as the domain owner for security, we came in to contribute, specifically to that. It was a lengthy process for those who were here, of defining the bounded context, identifying the problem, using the model that Pedro shared with everybody of, Triple D. And through that, we saw it as one of the best placed kind of like a methodology to build a good security architecture. So we couldn't get this from Agile, we couldn't get this from, some of the methodologies that have been promoted in terms of planning. But, this kind of like model is actually gave us kind of like much more confidence that we will be able to trace the business objectives, design around them, and go through the wheel and meet the business and regulatory requirements required here. And drive it through a couple of cycles to identify, gaps and improvements over time. So we're part of that from inception in terms of the identification of the problem and the documentation of those bounded contexts, and even building the high-level architecture. And now we are on the low-level architecture side, wherein we're now kicking in the Agile methodology, and we're implementing some components from the high-level architecture while we're busy defining others on the low-level architecture side, so that we don't follow a waterfall approach for that. Implementation of the alpha version has started, and we're on track, in terms of the high-level milestones that have been set. And in the next two, quarters, we'll actually be continuing on, the building for the alpha and the beta version, and also going through a security testing and validation prior to, announcing a productive ready, instance of the reference architecture. So in a nutshell, that's where we are in this kind of like domain. And just to quickly give you a rundown and breakdown, I didn't want to bring a lot of details into this session because of limited time, but we're tracing this kind of like tightly from an implementation program perspective. And we've actually broken it down into various smaller manageable components, which are actually pluggable into the overall picture. So, where we are is really kind of like, looking at the prioritized items for alpha, actually running with them from low-level design, implementation, and testing in an AWS environment. And we've done very well from the beginning, just to make sure that we can be a little bit more ahead of the rest of the component, because in our current architecture, everything else will be rallied around security components. So it was very important for us to be ahead of the game. The percentage-wise, we're sitting on about 58% on most of those prioritized aspects. And on the low-level design side as well, we tiered down the high-level architecture that we have. We actually kind of like breaking it down into smaller, implementable components, which we're using the AWS serverless implementation for those. And this is not a duplicate of anything else that we're doing on infrastructure as code, but this is really for the testing environment, building these components, proving that they work, and later on we could put them into any other infrastructure as code model that Moja Loop adopt at the final. So K8 implementation is also ongoing, and just to make sure that we actually default security, we embed security deep into all the K8 implementation. We had a lot of guidelines that we got from the likes of Tom Daly on this aspect. But yeah, eventually when we release this, all those can be reviewed just to make sure that they are aligned to the best practice available and the standards that we have developed over time. And in terms of the build overall on progress, we're sitting on about 50% and 35%. And we're thinking of moving that, closer to kind of like 50%, by the middle of next year. So that has started, that is going very well. A lot of work has been planned in that, and we were much more happy with the progress today. And we were still opening up this to the community. So if there is any interested party in getting involved, coming in, taking one or two, stories or epics around that, we were open to that. So we can work out a model wherein we can co-develop this with the community contributors. There's just enough work for anybody to get involved. So any interested party, get hold of me or Simeon, and we can actually plan that accordingly. Okay, that was reference architecture. Moving to fraud and risk management, security implementation. So in here, really, the objective is to bring in all functionalities at the same level of security and align to the module loop standards, where they're formatted, and also some of our policies we have, especially around, the intellectual property, just to make sure that the resulting product is completely free from a legal perspective. So for that, we actually kind of like engage deeply with whoever is adding new functionality. And in this case, it was FMS teams. We have seen a lot of work that they've done. They've presented rigorously through, several PI, their business statement and their approach to this. So we have a little bit more good insight of what they're doing. And what we have done as a kind of like as a first step is really to work with them and define the security principle that they need to build into that. So we give the overall security design and implementations to them, but we just guide them in terms of what are the high level principles that they need to factor in their implementation of their platform, so that we don't confine them to any specific technique or methods, but we actually allow them to be as versatile as they can to bring in something that works well with their platform, balance usability and balance security and any other aspects that they're considering as part of their requirements. So the high level principles have been shared and have been workshopped with the team, and they're working off the stories to make sure that all that is embedded. And second to that was really to perform an open source security scan on their current code base. The code base is still evolving. They've actually, built, maybe what they call the beta edition on them. So, but we didn't want to leave this to the last minute where they have a bigger code base and we start identifying issues. So we started, pretty early on this journey. And we performed the scan, last month, and we've got the result of that and shared with them, identify, where improvements needs to be. But overall, they're very good in terms of how they align themselves with the modular policy. Plan for next quarter is really to work with them. Once the design is finalized, the implementation is actually done, and they're ready for their first release at the end of April as planned. Then we'll actually be there to review the security and actually be able to identify additional things that they need to put for consideration. Testing and validation will be part of that, and according to the milestones that they have for their renewal cycle. So yeah, this is us and working with Justus and Martins and Jaco, and all is going well in this area. Just to give a quick snapshot, as you're aware, we don't share this detail that much, but just to give a quick snapshot on how are they doing. There wasn't any, kind of like a scary security, finding that we found. And all the findings that we put forward, they have a mitigation plan in place for them. So, they're well aligned from a license perspective, only kind of like 2 high-risk licenses, which actually have dual licenses with permissible licenses from BSD and MIT, which are all Aperture 2.0 compatible. So from a license risk, they're fine, and there's a mitigation for the risk that we detected. From a library perspective, that's actually an ongoing process. So there'll always be, kind of like vulnerabilities detected in the existing libraries, in the new libraries. So they have measures in place to detect this, from the experience they had, recently when they were breached while building. So they've actually kind of like take measures to run Oss scans and make sure that they can see what goes into those packets. So that is actually under control, and hence the latest scan only detected about 5 vulnerabilities. This is actually very clean compared to some of the assessments that we do across the board, from a cross-leg perspective, it actually comes much more bleaker than this. So that is actually how they're sitting, and we're hoping to do the same just before the beta release, and we hope for a similar, cleaner result or even better. Moving on into the license landscape. So as you can see, lots of libraries that they are leveraging from open source perspective, a variety of licenses that they use, with the majority being MIT. It's always the case across the board. So if they can just continue doing the same and avoiding AGPL, avoiding GPL 2.0 to 3.0, that will actually put them much more in par with the license policy that we have. Okay, to move quickly into the continuous vulnerability management efforts, this is where the core team, Louis from a DevSecOps perspective, are actually controlling it very well. And we haven't had much of need to replace anything. And I had some comments around Cycle CI, but so far, those are some of the things that are actually helping us to enforce the policies, from a release perspective. And we hadn't had much need to really look at that deeply. The biggest thing here we do is really ongoing maintenance and making sure that we do regular security patching of what we have, all the landscape that we have. And as kind of like Simeon has indicated, we recently added a lot of code base, about 1 million lines of code. And the importance of continuing with this is much more higher than before. So we continue to use, Snark and Dependabot for security alert, and also we're doing the NPM audit, on specific reports from time to time. In terms of improving the workflows, that's an ongoing thing, just to make sure that we cache as much as we can, and there are no, policy bypass on what we have. And benchmarking against white source, that's what we do once a quarter. And I'll actually, in the next slide, present the report specific to all the core reports that we have on Moja Loop. And also we have a community vulnerability disclosure process that is actually being leveraged, which is good to see. And from time to time, we get this disclosed to us confidentially in a safe manner, and we look at them and put mitigation plans together. So last PI, we only got 1 on the core reports, around credentials, and about 5 on the learning platform, which we believe it will actually be resolved as part of the migration to the new platform. But we still need to check, because all of those were always, 10 related. They might persist into the new platform. We never know, but we will be on the watch for those. Plan for DevSecOps improvements is around, establishing a way of knowing what is inside the code that is contributed. This actually came in as one of the discussions we have with the team around, yes, we're open source, we allow anybody to contribute, but we will actually be required to put some measures to provide some level of confidence to our adopters that, all the codes that we received donated to us, we checked it from a security perspective to make sure that there are no bad malicious actors that can, come in, either intentional or deliberate. And that's actually what we're actually going to tackle. The first point there is to really look at the security metrics, and define them. Whatever can actually be defined and be clearly stipulated to the contributors, we'll do that. That will actually be the external view of it, but we will still have the internal side of it, wherein, those are actually just checking for bad things and malicious actors that will keep them internal and confidential. And once we've defined those matrices, it's only then that we could look at what is the right solutions for this. Will it be a basic scripting to detect these issues, or manual code review, or a static code analyzer? So we do not want to predict and pick a tool before defining our needs for code security. And the second point is really around code signing, just to improve it for support efficiencies. If anybody logs a support text and say, hey, I downloaded this repo, it is vulnerable, then we can do quick kind of like verify checking if it's the original from us or if it has been changed somehow. We had one instance with one of the implementation team wherein they renamed the repo that they've actually downloaded as is, but we actually had to and fro and say it doesn't look like our repo. They say it is a UR repo, but with this measures in place, be able to do those operational efficiencies around support. But very important, we'll actually give guarantees and trust that they can verify that the source code they're using, they come from the original source, and avoid any duplicates or malicious actors of using that as a way in. So that is in a nutshell on the DevSoc processes. Moving on to the output of the Oss Scan on our core repos. So we scanned about 104 code repos. We could arrange this differently, but we just worked with what we have, and they detected over 7,055 unique libraries across the code bases. So the overall picture was good, especially as benchmark against the white source database, wherein we are doing better than average, both from vulnerable libraries as well as outdated libraries. But this is really limited to kind of like previously whoever used white source. Is not anything beyond that, but they're quite heavy in terms of the customers they bought. It can just give us a very good indicative of really where we stand against the rest. And the number of up-to-date libraries is kind of like the highest percentage, I think over 80%, which is good, which actually indicates that we have good version controls and version management in place that will actually keep improving on that. And also the outdated libraries, 434 is not that high, and a few of those can actually be resolved, as they all have kind of like the upgrade path. And we have multiple kind of like libraries with multiple versions easily resolved by defaulting to the most updated and non-vulnerable version. And also in terms of the vulnerabilities, we had a closer look at this, and there is nothing more to worry, because all the vulnerabilities we detected mostly are from dependencies, and they all have remediations that could be executed from the dependency providers, mainly npm based. So for that, it's not a point of worry, but everything else looks kind of like predicting. At high level, this is the result, both on the security risk side and on the license risk side. Starting with the license risk, we're tracking very well this, and given the number of libraries we have, over 7,000, we were doing very good at about only 14 that really marked as potentially linked to other licenses. Out of all those 14, kind of like high risk, which high risk is nothing else, AGPL and GPL. So in there, 6 of those have dual licenses, which we don't have to do anything, and shift the code. We just default to the, most permissible licenses. And if there's kind of specific packages for that, we will actually use packages. Because sometimes here is and or. If it's and, it means there will be specific packages for GPL and other packages for other permissible licenses. But if it's or, it will be, your choice to choose which license you default into. The libraries that we detected as GPL, I've mentioned them there, Sam and Mikael, and we could have a look at the report and see if this could be mitigated or this could be replaced, just to ensure that we are in line with the modular policy. Indicated the high risk side, everything else is good except 6 that do not have fixes, but we could have a look at those 6 and see, what level of risk do they post? Where are they in the platform? Are they in the back end, front end, and the attack path to them, whether it's local executions with administrative rights or not. And based on that, we can make a decision whether are they harmful or we could keep them for a while. Great. That together with the slide give us a footprint of our license usage. MIT will always top the list, and we see there's a lot of ISC that is used in BSD2 and Apache 2.0. So overall, everything is more on the permissive side of things. And as we add more and more code, we're pretty much good that this kind of like pie chart will remain the same or will be more greener. So that can give us confidence that we are committed to our free, software for use with no, legal permutations later on. Okay, so in terms of kind of like what we have seen as top priorities, from speaking to the implementers, this is really kind of like from, over the years that I've been working with the implementers, and also from my experience of being on the implementation side where I started. And over time, we actually recorded this as what they've actually identified as concerns. Much of this is already kind of like have projects linked to them that are really are resolving them. And especially kind of like from a reference architecture perspective, there's a lot that we brought into the security context domain. We defined them as things that need to be addressed. And some of this are actually being driven from, the implementation teams. The teams are working, in some of the latest implementation in Myanmar. They're picking up much more, newer stuff that needs us to address going forward. And we actually have the business operations stream as well. That's actually addressing, issues around separation of duties, issues around, security auditing and role-based access control. So there are various teams that already, have their hands on this. And our role is really to kind of like make this kind of like visible to everybody and show them from a one single point of view from a security and compliance perspective, and work together with everyone else to, to put mitigations in place. If I have to maybe get the top, things like sharing KYC information with participant DFSP, here they're good to share KYC information with the switch and kind of like default the switch to some of the privacy laws that impacts on them. But there's open questions that once you share this with a participating DFSP and they have that information for a longer period, they stop participating on the scheme. A little bit of processes around how that KYC information is tracked, not just from the switch, but beyond the switch, ever has been shared with. And this can bring in, Michael, the discussions we had around zero proof identity. And that actually can be something that we can, see if it can resolve this by ensuring that we can give confirmation of the KYC information we have. But we have to look at what will be the implication of that on things like the RFMS, which need more deeper context information. But all these are resolvable. We haven't seen any of this being an absolute blocker from a both process perspective, which affects the business model, and also from a technical perspective, which really, talk down to, how can we make our architecture flexible enough to add this, which is required today, and then also to evolve it to add much more stuff. There were a lot of talks around payment grade security and from a cryptographic control perspective. And we addressed that, it is being, raised, from community to community, because of the people that actually wanted to have interest in this, that coming from a strong payment background, card background. And this is actually one of the biggest measures that you need to have in place. But slowly we address those, and the latest reference architecture actually incorporate the crypto subsystems very well, and have open APIs that allows any key managements to be leveraged for those during implementation. So we're tracking very well against this. There isn't any other one that I could say would actually not be able to resolve it to the satisfaction of the implementers. And with that, I assume you're going to spend a little bit more time, for, any open discussions, any questions going forward. And thanks, over to you.
Thanks, Godfrey. I'm waiting to see if there's anyone who has any comments. You may ask a question either by unmuting or just typing into the chat. Miller, I see you unmuted. Do you have a question or comment? I guess not. Godfrey, there's a question.
Hang on a second. I'm sorry, I was double muted.
Okay.
I have a quick question, Godfrey. And by the way, congratulations on your 10 PIs. My goodness, time flies. So quickly, the log4j dilemma arises from the use of Java platforms within our code stack. And I know we are still using Kafka, which is Java-based. Are you aware of other Java-based systems that could give rise to similar kinds of issues?
So yeah, I think within our ecosystem, we did a check in terms of where we're dependent on anything that is a log4j instance. And thanks for bringing it. I should have actually brought in a snapshot. I think from in our instances, maybe Pedro can chime in here. So nothing was found in our direct code because we don't have kind of like the Java code, and the rest was actually in services such as Kibana and then others that from an implementation perspective they made leverage. But all is really transitive dependencies from our side. that we issued a guideline to all the implementers to track them if they're introducing anything else that is not connected to our landscape, then they can actually resolve that with working with those providers. But yeah, we're not aware of anything else, Nila, other than what Jeff already mentioned.
That's great that that's behind us. Yeah, I think the sensitivity also is to the use of Java in the system environment. We don't want to increase that. We have certain choices we've made, such as the use of Kafka that we made for 100 reasons. But I think we wouldn't necessarily want to select more Java for the stack if we can avoid that. I just was curious if you had stumbled on it, but it sounds like that's basically behind us at this point. So at least the Log4j is.
Yeah, so we had early discussions around looking at payment manager, which is kind of like partially Java based, and we did a scan on it as well. So we couldn't find any instance of Log4j, but there were other code quality issues that needed to be resolved before the adoptions can be completed at DA level. But at high level, we'll track this even beyond this and any other threats that will come along the way. So Log4j was just a wake-up call for us, and we'll actually look at that language specific, anything that are affecting what we have from a JavaScript and TypeScript. That's where we're going to look deeply to ensure that we're safe.
I did notice a couple of other things too that I'll just flag quickly, and then I know we're running short here on time. So there was a presentation yesterday that demonstrated the use of SQL inside of a YAML definition. I'm afraid I don't remember exactly the context. Sam may remember this, but that, or Miguel. The concern, of course, is that code injections through a SQL situation could be quite difficult to resolve. Now, that's not exposed to end users, but there were conditions where variables were being filled. So we had SQL with variable filling, and so something has to be placed, a requirement be placed upon the selection of those parameters that cannot contain values that could lead to damage to that and to a SQL injection attack. But then beyond that, of course, we want to understand what have we done in the code to be sure that even if that did occur, that we can at least detect, if not correct, those circumstances. I think this is sort of a second level study, but that would be quite helpful. So I think Sam is saying in the chat here about strict type checking on variables. But in this particular case, it was based in a YAML file with parameter substitution. And so where we get that parameter from, we can't know. And so we have to know, what did we do with that YAML value as we pull it out of the YAML file and use it in operational code. I just want to be careful that we don't leave ourselves open to doing all the right things at the platform level, but leaving a hole in the use.
Yeah. Those are the low-hanging fruit that we should resolve them structurally, and hence you have seen me pointing the need for defining extended code security metrics and use that to really inform some static code analysis against any changes to the existing code or anything else that is net new. So we could put specific method that looks at injection attacks, from front end to database levels, just to make sure that we could detect that early and resolve them, to make sure that we're safe.
Great, and I think obviously it's part documentation. It's also making some choices in the code that minimize the exposure, but it's also documentation and indicating where these areas are, and that everyone they don't slip by unnoticed. Thank you.
Yeah. Great.
Thanks, Miller. Godfrey, I'm not sure if you saw Steve's comment. Is there any way a lot of that can be written up into a security at Moduloop sort of document for the foundation team, particularly the last slide? I think that's a conversation we can take offline, but it would be good to have a summary to share around. Excellent.
Definitely will do. So I'll have a look at the question down there, then I'll explore it to everybody there.
Awesome. I think I saw David unmute. David, do you have a comment?
Yeah, just a quick one. The Log4j vulnerability was interesting in how it was actually making use of an external server and injecting debug log statements that would actually be used in order to connect to an external server. I'm wondering if we've thought any about network policies at a Kubernetes level so that we can potentially lock down any internet access or external access from the pods in case something else shows up like this, whether this was not a SQL injection, but it was an interesting injection of communications to an outside server.
Yeah, good point. And we had some tractions on that and working with Tom Daly around infrastructure as code and seeing how best can we really put the best practice framework for implementing this on a containerized environment, to implement stricter restriction on port-to-port level security. And so we incorporated that into our network security standard for the implementers to have a look at it and implement it. We would try not to do a lot of things from this level, but really to come in and guide, especially for infrastructure related stuff that you could only see them effective in a running environment. But yeah, we have that as part of our security standards and guidelines to the implementers.
Just a comment there, Miguel here. In the version 14 of the Helm charts that we're working on, we already do have hooks and the ability to add those in. So once we do get them, or once we have an idea of how best to set them up, we can easily fit them in. We also have service accounts as well being set up for each of our deployments as well to assist with the policies.
Thanks, Miguel.
Great.
Awesome. That caps it for our time. Thank you so much, Godfrey, for that update. I see in the chat lots of people seem to be interested in helping with the security white paper. So that's something to definitely look forward to.